with me right now on the Politicrat Daily podcast is none other than the person who was the very first guest on this podcast. And she makes a very welcome return. It's Dr. Cindy Duke. She is the medical and laboratory director of the Nevada Fertility Institute. She also hosts a podcast, and I will link to this podcast because I think you really have to hear it. It's really great. Is the Girl Powered Success and Survival International Mission and Foundation. She's a patron of that organization as well. She is on social media on a number of fronts. I will be linking to a lot of that. And of course, she is certainly free to repeat all of the social media places you can find her. She's also got a wonderful website. It's drcindyduke.com. That's drcindyduke.com. And with me now, welcome back, Dr. Cindy Duke.
Oh my goodness. Hello, Omar, and thank you for having me back. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays to you too. Thank you so very much for being here, Dr. Cindy. It's just wonderful to have you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I can't believe that it's been so long since we were together like this. Time is flying. Oh my goodness.
It certainly has. Time has flown.
Woo.
Um, I've got to tell you, though, Doctor, the fact that we are almost at the end of this year is going to be somewhat, at least for me personally, comforting to get through. I'm sure I'm not the only one to get
Yes.
to the next calendar year.
It's true. No, I think most of us want 2020 to be in our rearview mirrors, right? It's going to be that year that we don't talk about a whole lot, but the one we will remember in our bones, in our spirits, and in our hearts, because it's been a year that it's brought everything to the fore. If it wasn't the pandemic, then the pandemic laid bare all of the issues that we've been fighting for as Black, Indigenous people of color across the world. All of the medical inequities came to the fore, the social and economic inequities. I mean, if we weren't clear about those before, now we know for sure that we live in a system with so many different tiers and so many different people um, who are truly faceless victims of a societal crime, so to speak. And so, I know for me, 2020 will stay, but I'm also eager to say I'm no longer in 2020.
Absolutely. Yes, indeed.
So,
I thought your summation is terrific. What you've just said there, and it's very important to keep those words in mind as we speak here, because there are a lot of people who obviously are no longer with us.
yes,
It's really devastating, and mental health
devastating.
wise, it takes a heck of a toll on people, particularly those who've lost loved ones. So that's something that
Yes.
we
Mhm,
acknowledge here.
mhm.
And having said that, I want to ask you about your practice at
Yeah.
the Nevada Fertility Institute and how you have fared, and
Yeah.
being the medical and laboratory director, and how that has been for you during these last 8 or 9 months with this pandemic and the
Yeah.
effects that it's had.
I would say that right now, in the month of December, the business is booming. But when this pandemic started, there were so many unknowns, right? And so, for me as the medical director, lab director, I'm also the founder of the practice. So, from a business side, we were scrambling with so many things. I had things that helped me though. So, the fact that I'm a PhD trained virologist helped me bring some calm to my team and to my patients. And I quickly said, you know what? Let me look into the data myself. Let me find the best practices instead of only waiting for what I was hearing from the media, which, we all must admit in the beginning it was botched in that we were told don't wear masks, then wear masks. Masks don't make a difference now. Masks make all the difference. I knew from January masks made all the difference. My very first post that I ever made about the virus, telling people to wash hands and put on a mask if you think you have a symptom. And so that's what I did. I quickly went ahead in the office and told all my staff, we're going to wear masks. We're going to start interviewing our patients the night before, screening them for symptoms, etc. So the first thing that I'm really grateful, and we just closed today for the Christmas holiday. from the dawn of the pandemic to this moment, not a single member of my team and not an active member of patient coming through the door has tested positive for COVID in our clinic or during treatment. And that I think is a testament to how rigorous our measures were that we set in place in terms of preventative measures. And, I take care of a vulnerable population, Omar. I'm taking care of women who are pregnant. My staff are amongst them, people who are pregnant, those with underlying diseases like diabetes. I have a very diverse staff who live in multi-generational households. All the things that were the big risk factors that we now know to be the major risk factors for COVID. And so, from that end, I really am grateful that we're all able to say we've walked away with our lives and we've walked away with our health, and we're able to start preparing for 2021, still being able to say none of us have gotten sick. From a business end, we did have to ramp things down for a while when the state of Nevada shut down. And so, I basically transitioned my practice from an everyday all services in office to a mostly telemedicine practice. The good news is I had been practicing telehealth for 4 years before this pandemic in the Caribbean, where I'm from. And so I quickly just took everything that I had been using and all of the resources I had to my disposal and converted them to using here in Nevada, which meant I kept being able to see my patients, talk to them, provide resources, provide mental health support. Because, as you just so rightfully alluded to, prescriptions for mental health medications have tripled this year. I've told people that in the past 4 years, in these last 9 months, I have written as many, if not more, prescriptions than I wrote in the 3 years preceding this year when it comes for things that are anti-anxiety, etc. Because everyone was just struggling with that. So I've definitely made a whole lot more referrals to therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, because I'm a huge believer in those steps first. But for some of my patients, they genuinely also needed prescriptions to help them sleep, to help them work. Significant number of my patients are what we call essential workers, whether it be in healthcare or here in Vegas, the service industries. And that's nerve wracking to be thinking about trying to get pregnant, having struggled to conceive. And then on top of that, now the thought of, oh my gosh, I might get sick with something that can kill me or cost me a pregnancy if I finally achieve one. Oh, very anxiety provoking. So it's been a journey. The good news is starting around June, we were able to resume doing fertility treatments in office, and we've since then consistently been working in the office. I have maintained the telehealth practice though, so that we can minimize the number of people coming into the office on a day-to-day basis, so that my staff won't have to feel super anxious. Where I communicate with my patients just like this via video. I get all dolled up for them and we talk, and it goes well. And I think they're really liking it because it also means they can access me even after hours and on weekends. And so it's been very convenient. And as a result, the practice has really been growing. I mean, in the last 3 months, actually starting in August, we have been, in terms of treatment volumes, we've nearly doubled what we were doing in January or February per month. That's how busy we've gotten, because the pandemic highlighted two big things about fertility and infertility. For my patients, what I've noticed, there are some people I haven't seen in 2-3 years who, I think, being home on lockdown, just sitting there watching their partners, they suddenly realize we need a kid in the house. And so they came in for treatment. For others, and this one has been a national trend for sure, is many people had time to investigate the concept, especially people with ovaries, the concept of fertility and the fact that eggs decline over time, the egg number and their performance. And so we've definitely seen an uptick in egg freezing at the clinic, and a lot more people engaging and asking questions about what do I need to do to freeze eggs, and even some people asking to freeze sperm. So that's another interesting thing that I've seen this year. Mhm.
Wow, I wouldn't. I'm surprised to hear that actually
Yeah, yeah.
about freezing the sperm too. My goodness.
Yes, and I do recommend sperm freezing, especially if you're someone who maybe has a history of certain cancers, or if you're someone who's diabetic. Certainly, if you're someone who may be struggling with cancer and may need chemo or radiation, then sperm freezing is a big thing that you should consider doing if you at all think you might want a biological child in the future.
Let me ask you one thing about that because you said certain types of cancers.
Yeah,
Would prostate cancer be in the mix there?
it
Because,
is. It
okay,
is. Because, prostate cancer, one, some chemotherapies for prostate cancer can destroy the cells that make sperm, and many of those cells won't recover. The second is prostate cancer. If you're getting what we call like the brachytherapy, which is that specialized targeting radiation, or any radiotherapy really, it can certainly lead to a number of dysfunction when it comes to achieving an erection, being able to ejaculate, etc. And so freezing sperm beforehand allows one to have some options for achieving pregnancy outside of needing things like in vitro or needing a doctor to actually go into the testicle to find sperm, which is not a comfortable procedure if they have
right,
to do it.
right. Right. Now, now, I'm glad that you're providing this is really important information for people listening or watching,
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
these things do factor in as well, and people should be thinking about them. And also, before getting to some of the things I wanted to ask you about, thinking about the way technology is going
yes,
to change a lot of things, has been and dramatically will. You talked about telehealth in your practice and keeping that as an extension of your practice, even beyond the initial thing. You had already had this experience 3 or 4 years or so of telehealth practice. So you were ideally positioned, but there, of course, lots of people who may not be.
right.
Technology is changing a lot. And can you talk a little bit about that? Because that
Yeah.
is not going to change. It's going to only become more
Oh,
technologically
yeah.
driven, which is going to be problematic for some people, I think.
I agree. And so I really, really will entreat listeners to move with the times. The truth is, that's one of the historical truths about any pandemic or any global shift that causes, we think about the plague, which was another infectious thing that was a bacterium known as Yersinia pestis. But after the plague and recognizing that rats were transmitting this bacterium, people changed their way of approaching hygiene, etc., even back then. In 1918, after the flu of 1918, which is unfortunately called the Spanish flu, it really was the flu of 1918. But after that pandemic, we really started understanding a lot about modern hygiene strategies, modern ways of decreasing transmission of disease, etc. Well, in the year 2020, we're also seeing a massive shift. And this is truly when the technological roots, sure, we've had technology with us for a long time, but for a lot of us, technology was still optional. 2020 was when we finally came to realize that technology became necessary for communication, for family interaction, certainly for conducting business. I feel like after 2020, a lot of places that thought they could only function as brick and mortar have now become click and mortar, right? So, they're going to focus more on warehouses, storehouses, but shipping products. In the world of fertility, we have come to learn, we were already utilizing some of this, but we're not utilizing on a larger scale, send out sperm tests. So, we were sending sperm collection kits to homes across the country so that our patients could collect semen and then ship it so we can get it tested. We had companies that now have come forward and really established their footing in the last 9 months, who can go to people's homes and collect blood work for testing, who can do special scans, with a QR code on someone's urine, and we can suddenly know all your hormones that day just from scanning your urine into a special app. And Dr. Duke sees it, and I can tell you if it's time or not for pregnancy. That in itself is going to break down borders and barriers. Because, for example, if you think of a number of our places in the world, where, by the way, infertility, my field, is universal. There are people suffering from infertility across the world, even though right now it's treated as a rich person's, rich country's disease. Infertility is affecting everybody, but the issue is, you have parts of the world where they cannot access even general women's health, far more fertility subspecialty services. Well, now with a lot of the technology, I can talk to an infertility patient anywhere in the world via video. I can ship testing to them anywhere in the world, and they can just take a picture, and I get a result. And so I don't need to have a massive fancy laboratory in the heart of certain parts of the world to be able to help them anymore. And that is going to change a lot of things, because it meant that for someone like me who's very interested in how technology can really break down barriers to receiving access to healthcare, this pandemic, if you can call it as a silver lining, is finally going to allow us to bring the technology and the much needed services to the parts of the world that previously were forecasted to only get that technology 10, 15, 20 years from now. In 9 months, the technology isn't only being tested out, it's gone live, the kinks have been ironed out, and now we can take it global. That's exciting.
That is really profound and powerful, and also it does revolutionize things. But
So,
if I can just be a devil's advocate for one
ah,
second and ask you about the flip side of this, some will probably say technology, a little bit invasive, big companies involved, profit to be made, this to be done, that to be done. Not so great histories of governments experimenting on people.
yes.
Isn't this a new way, Dr. Cindy, for someone to do the very same thing they did, say, in the 1940s or 50s with the Tuskegee experiments? What do you say to people who exercise really well justified reasons to
Yeah.
be cautious about this?
And I like to first say I acknowledge the mistrust and the concern, because it's true and they're justified in saying, what about what happened historically? Because we have to acknowledge history, and we have to acknowledge the truth about what happened in those events. And so, for example, Tuskegee, as a student of medical history, medical infectious disease history, Tuskegee is one that has never left my mind. Same for the Nuremberg trials that happened during the Nazi regime in Germany, and across Europe. So when we talk about Tuskegee, the key to Tuskegee was that the United States government, which is why people are very leery of the idea of government involvement in healthcare in many ways, government actually recruited people from across the United States, not just Black men. They recruited men from across the US and said, let's study you for low blood and for what's known as syphilis. Now, the truth is, they didn't give anybody a syphilis infection. The government didn't make people sick. And I think it's important for me to say that, because a lot of the conspiracies currently circulating say the government gave them syphilis, but they did not. Syphilis has been a sexually transmitted infection that has been with humanity from the time immemorial. Cleopatra died from syphilis, to give an example. A number of famous people and kings and queens had syphilis. But the truth is, up until the 1940s, syphilis was considered an untreatable, incurable infection, which is, if you had syphilis, it stayed with you. It wasn't just a venereal disease, it led to deformities, it led to dementia, it led to the rotting of the nose. Fun fact, Omar, the very first nose jobs were done in India over 1,000 years ago, and it was to treat what would happen after a syphilitic infection.
Wow. Oh my
Wow.
goodness.
The very first rhinoplasties were done because of syphilis, well before modern medicine. Anyway, back to what I was saying, which was, so they recruited all these people, and the intent was to follow the natural history of syphilis. Now, what happened was, around the time of World War II, penicillin became prevalent and available on the market. Penicillin is the world's first great antibiotic. And it was discovered that penicillin can treat syphilis. And they quickly made that penicillin available to the non Black people who were in that trial that had syphilis. And they did not, for over 30 years, let these Black men who were still in their communities, sexually engaging, dementia, etc., also setting in. And at no point did they say, hey, we found a treatment for the thing you're suffering from. And that is what's really painful about the history of the Tuskegee experiments. And also, it's a perfect example of what we call medical apartheid. Because literally, what happened was when something became available that could help, they withheld it. That's medical racism right there. They withheld it from one group simply because of the color of their skin, leaving them to think that they still had something incurable and they just have to live with it and transmit it and live with it, while they essentially eradicated syphilis from another group. And today, why did I point that out? Because right now, with the onset and the bringing of vaccines, the therapies that are starting to become available for COVID, we're starting to see the same thing play out. But now there's a special piece of technology being used against us, which is people are now co-opting stories like the Tuskegee experiment, misrepresenting what really happened, and is telling people, oh, don't take vaccines, don't take therapies, COVID isn't real. When in fact, COVID is real, people are dying, and we do now have therapies coming online that are effective to prevent the disease from getting to the point where you're either dying or going to be crippled for the rest of your life. But because there's this massive misinformation campaign, the very people who are going to need it, our Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, are saying, no, thank you. So now guess who's actually creating our own Tuskegee? They're using our fear from Tuskegee to help us create a new because Tuskegee against ourselves. And so that's why I'm taking opportunities to talk with you and anybody else who would have me, so we can talk about the fact that what we're looking at right now, if we don't step in, if we don't advocate for things like what's called the People's Campaign, the People's Vaccine Movement, which is intended to say, this is not about capitalism, which you rightfully, devil's advocate brought up, which is yes, if we don't let these companies know that it's not enough for you to make vaccines and then profit from them while communities here and around the world who don't have enough money to buy your vaccine are left to die, suffer, and spread something that keeps their economies from growing, that's unacceptable. And so we're currently advocating for President-elect Biden, Vice President-elect Harris to hear the call and to look into how do we make vaccines available for everyone who wants it. And notice I say wants it. If you don't want it, that's fine, that's okay. But think about this. At the moment, we're looking at countries that are, let's say, sub-Saharan Africa, where you've got about 30 countries, half of which could not currently afford, based on their GDP, to purchase the COVID vaccines that either Moderna, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Johnson and Johnson are making, even though we know how effective they are. And why is that? Because COVID vaccines currently, they have a limit in how much they can make per month. The United States has already spent well over $1 billion buying up vaccines, which means they've bought up about the next 4 years of vaccines that these companies can make at the current level they're making them at in terms of how much. Canada has bought up 6 times as much vaccine as it needs. United Kingdom, same thing. Japan, same thing. So what that means is, even though there's now a vaccine, at the current rate of how a capitalist economy is set up, most of the world, particularly communities of color, will not be able to afford the vaccine. And what we're proposing with the People's Vaccine Movement is using the same approach we eventually took for antiretroviral therapy for HIV, which was, in the late 90s, countries like Brazil decided and said, you know what, we're going to make any patent for an HIV drug public property. And we're going to start making these medications on large scale and distributing it to our people in Brazil and any other country who'd want to buy it. Cuba became part of that pact. And that is how they were able to finally turn HIV from a death sentence, which it was in parts of the world, in sub Saharan Africa, Asia, Asia Minor, and turn it from something that was a death sentence to now HIV is considered a chronic illness. And that's because we have available medications and treatment, because we abandoned the idea of just doing it for profit. Only if you can afford it, you can get it. Brazil saved over $1 billion by deciding to do that back in 1997, a billion US dollars.
Wow.
And yes, and that's what we're looking to talk about today. That's what I'm hoping to remind people. I know the word vaccine has come to take a negative connotation to us here in first world developed countries. But let's put it this way. While for most of us, we haven't seen measles, we've never seen mumps, we've never seen polio. Some of us, Omar, I remember seeing older people who had polio when I was a kid, but you're not seeing young people with polio nowadays in our countries. And that's because vaccines successfully eradicated those diseases in our countries. But you know what? Because those vaccines were still too expensive for a lot of countries outside of the wealthy countries, polio is still endemic in some parts of Africa. Measles is still killing 200,000 children per year around the world, because they're still only now finally getting access to vaccines because NGOs are bringing them vaccines. And what I'm here to say as that long-winded answer to your question is, this is why we need to harness technology. We need to harness the rights that we have as we voted. We need to harness Vice President elect promised that he would remember the people that brought him to power. And as the people who brought him to power, we need to remind him that we need his help, so that we're not sitting here watching our brothers and sisters across the pond, because the Atlantic is a big pond. We only see across the pond when we're referring to Europe, but Africa is also across the pond, technically. And we need to make sure that those communities in Central America, South America, that are not the wealthy countries that we talk about, we need to make sure they can access these vaccines now. That's what we need to make sure. COVID vaccine shouldn't just be the vaccine that we go and get a couple weeks before we travel to these countries to take cute pictures and come back. We need to be able to go to those countries and those people also feel safe from us, not just us going there to be protected from them.
I really appreciate that you've said what you've said here, because it's very important. And I hope that everybody listening or watching really takes to heart and takes to special account what you have said, because what you referred to as the Vaccine Alliance, they may be the very same organization who, at least a week or two ago, had said that the vast majority of the poor countries across the planet
Mhm.
would get maybe 10% of its peoples vaccinated.
Yeah.
10%, which
Shocking.
is, it really is. It really
Mhm.
is. So, I thank you for saying these very important things. And I hope that people do get active. I talk about that all the time on this podcast, Dr. Cindy. The
Yes.
need for us to engage, to
We
be
do.
active,
We
to
do.
not sit on the sideline now. This is the time. We've got Georgia, for example, having its two Senate races. We need Georgia voters to get involved and get voting. And we need, for all of us, as
Mhm.
we get toward January 20th, to start putting together an agenda and presenting it now to
Exactly.
Biden and Harris. Do
Yeah.
not wait till they get in. Do not wait till the first 100 days. There's no such thing, I keep saying to people,
Yeah.
as we're going to let them settle in. This is, people are not settling in right now.
No
People are dying.
settling. And you know what? We're the ones here saying let them settle. All the powerful interest groups and the lobbyists, they've already got their ear. And so we are behind the eight ball if we're waiting for them to settle in. And like you said, COVID, there's no settling with COVID, right? There's no settling if, as a physician, my biggest fear is if I were to travel somewhere and someone passed out on the ground and someone said, "Is there a doctor around?" And in my attempt to resuscitate, what if I kill myself? Right? And so I need you guys to fight for me the same way I'm going to fight for you if I found you in distress. The same way my colleagues are going to fight for you if they found you in distress. And the way we fight is we vote, we lobby, we get the word out, and we when we discover conspiracy theories that aren't founded in truth or are twisting the truth to sound like it's something real, that we call it out and we say, hey, I see what you're doing, and I'm not going to let you cost my people their life because it sounds like it's real, even though I know the true basis here. You've just co opted it, you've corrupted the truth.
Absolutely. And I really did want to, again, thank you for saying all of that. It's very important. And so, people out there listening, please, please, if you're watching, please, let's get involved. Let's have an agenda. I said over and over, as you've heard, regular listeners, to think of the three most important issues to you that matter most and
Yes.
coalesce around them, write an item about them, write a couple of sentences, get other people together, coalesce with them, build coalitions, have Zoom meetings, talk to people, get like minded people involved, and build bridges and coalitions together and present a plan and coalesce with other organizations and bring those issues to the federal government, to your local government, to your state government. That's how we start to move forward and organize and have an organization and agenda behind us, because we can sit here and say things on the sidelines, but if we're not activating ourselves and getting involved, it's really not going to get listened to. And as you point out, the lobbyists have already got their ear. They're
No,
not waiting for anybody to settle in Washington, D.C.
no.
They've talked to Biden, I'm sure, already,
Yeah.
during the campaign, even. So,
They're
um,
already writing policy and bills. I don't know that many people realize this, but a lot of the bills that are introduced in Congress were written by lobbyists, right? And
I
so
mentioned that just the other day, actually.
good, good. No,
Yes.
it's important that people know this. So when Congress reconvenes on January 4th or whatever date they're going to reconvene and they're bringing bills to the floor for, debate, a lot of those are written by those lobbyists. And so we can also write bills, but we have to coalesce and come together and say, let's do it. We have to, going back to the use of technology, we finally have technology. Can you imagine how amazing it would have been if the technology that we have now was available during the time of the Tuskegee experiment? We would have blown it right open since then. We wouldn't have waited for special media interests to decide if we get heard, to decide if our story goes live. Nowadays, we can just press and it's going. Someone will hear, people who are in countries where they're slated to get only 10% of the vaccine, or they're slated to get vaccines that cannot be given to their children or their pregnant women, but we have vaccines here that are safe enough for us to do it here. They need to have access to the same thing.
Absolutely. And this is something that I had mentioned to a prior guest. Um, I kind of said it in a cynical way, but I really meant it. I said, you know that rich people are going to get this vaccine first, and also it's not going to be free of charge in America.
No, it won't be free. The only way it will be free at point of service, and that's what we're saying, point of delivery free, because we understand it does take technology to build the vaccine, to create the vaccine, to ship the vaccine, etc. But it shouldn't be the responsibility of the people whose taxpayer dollars funded the research that discover the vaccine. Let's take the mRNA vaccine, for example. That is actually technology that belongs to the NIH, the National Institutes of Health. That agency, that organization, which also funded my training. So technically, taxpayers paid for me to become an MD, PhD doctor because I'm an NIH funded trainee. Taxpayers paid for me to become who I am. They pay for the NIH to function every year with its near billion plus budget. And that's how the mRNA technology was developed. And so when we are saying now to the Pfizers of the world and the Modernas of the world that you now have technology that we built, that we paid for, make sure we all have access to it. We mean it. And we're not saying it because we're just greedy, whiny people and only the wealthy people deserve to. No, we don't want trickle down medicine because we did not have trickle down taxes that we paid. We paid our taxes. We want the result of what we invested in.
Absolutely. Well, absolutely. This holiday season, here we are. I mean, I could talk to you forever about these vaccines, which one's better, which one isn't. The stuff that's coming out of the UK with the South Africa situation now and the strains of, I mean, we really could go on, and one of these days we'll have to go into that some more. But I really do want to ask you about this holiday season, the basics for people again, because I do think that we need to have refresher courses on this because, as you pointed out, the messaging was so muddled in January and in February, and it cost people their lives, quite frankly, later on. And it also affects the way people behave as they walk about. I still see people without masks on. I dare say some of the listeners out there, or people viewing us, have seen it themselves with people walking around, still a few here
Yeah.
and there without masks. But still, I wanted to ask you, Dr. Cindy, about what people should be doing right now to protect themselves, and about mask etiquette as
Yes.
well.
So I think, the first thing I want to acknowledge is that there is widespread COVID fatigue. We're all tired. Some of us are literally just throwing caution to the wind because we're exhausted. We're tired of wearing masks. We're tired of just seeing the same walls within our house for so long. And we're tired of not having the freedoms that we've come to enjoy in our democratic societies. I get that. But now is not the time to get complacent. Now is not the time to stop washing your hands. There actually was never a good time to not wash your hands, but we've discovered many of us really won't washing our hands or washing them the way they should be washed, which is the 20-second rule. But yes, you should wear your masks. Masks have always been shown to be protective when it comes to anything that's known as a respiratory virus, but also just general for protecting you from inhaling anything that's in your atmosphere and vice versa from you breathing things out. Masks do not lead to low oxygen levels. They do not lead to brain damage. They do not lead to anything untoward that was also unfortunately put out there to scare you. What struck me a lot, Omar, in the last 4 days was watching certain politicians who spent the last 9 months telling people things like don't wear a mask, come to our events. Even Herman Cain went to an event and died because he caught COVID there. And these very people who said they weren't sure the virus was real, they weren't sure that people needed to wear a mask, who created false narratives about constitutional rights when it came to masks, they were the first ones lining up to get vaccines before healthcare workers, before essential workers. They're getting vaccines, Omar. And that is striking to watch because the truth is the risk of COVID is even worse today than it was 3 months ago. And a lot of that is the direct result of the messaging that came out that told people masks don't change anything when we knew they did. Social distancing, oh, they're taking away your rights. Fight them. Go out and fight. Go to the bars and congregate and fight. And now people are dying and they're unwilling to follow the basic measures which have been proven not just here but in other countries. We're all talking about New Zealand and we're talking about the other countries where they actually did keep their message consistent, and the population also played a role in continuing to follow the consistent messages. So here, wash your hands, wear your mask. If you live in a multi-generational household, there are way more studies now that have confirmed that the number one way you spread COVID is to your own members of your household. And so if you're someone who has to leave the home to go out, etc., to go to work, then you should have extra special measures in place for when you come home to quarantine yourself from your family, etc. We know now that that's how households are getting sick is one person comes home with the virus and it spreads. And I think it's because many people, even if they're not complacent outside of the house, they come home and they do throw all caution to the wind, forgetting that they're still living and breathing and they were living and breathing outside before they came home.
And what if one scenario I want to provide? What if someone is coming into your house to repair something? I
Yeah.
mean, your faucet's leaking or something like that. Um,
They should wear a
what?
mask.
Right.
I've had a couple people come into my home over the course of the last 9 months to fix different things. Like here in Vegas, my AC stopped working in July. The horror. Um, you know,
Mm.
champagne problems, but the horror. It was hot. And so I was very specific. So I mean, I'm a physician, so I know I have access to these things, but I brought home foot covers, and so when they came, they had to take their shoes off, but I also had them put on these foot covers. I made sure they kept their mask on. And I am very polite but blunt in telling people you have to wear a mask and it has to cover your nose and completely seal around your face. I'm very serious about that. And so they came in, but we did that. But also I screen, I ask questions. I have also been impressed though by most companies that are coming to your home. They're asking you as well, right? Has anyone in your household been sick? Has someone in your household been tested positive for COVID in the last 10 days? So I've seen the flip side where companies are also being very careful, much like my clinic is doing. But for you, the homeowner, the household, head of household, yes, you should be asking these questions too and providing opportunities, gelling. Yeah, I keep gel everywhere in my house. So if you show up, I'm squirting you with gel if you don't have water for you to wash your hands. And I haven't had anybody fight me back either.
Well, that's good to hear that they have not done that, and
Yeah.
that's a really good thing. And I'm glad you said that once again. These are very important tips. And
Yeah.
as you can see here now, the mask, how,
Yes.
how to wear it, how to put it on.
Yes.
Um,
So onto the nose and then have it seal. Yeah, so you put it on like that, and then you pull under your chin too. So yep, that's why it has those multiple folds. So it goes under your chin, it's secure there. And then up top by your nose, you press on that because there's a metal, yep, and you shape it onto your face. So you press and just shape it onto your face so that it seals around your nose bridge, because each of us has a different shape there. And you come down to the sides of your nose and you press it on, and voila. Yes.
there we
Now,
go.
that's how you wear your mask. The big thing is most people are taking it off and it's hanging on their chin for a while. They'll take it off and hold it in their hands or put it in their back pocket. Technically, when you do that, you're moving viral particles or what we call fomites that were on the outside. Let's say you've been walking around all day, Omar, and you went to a store, you talked to different people. Hopefully, they're also wearing their masks. What we know is if you're both wearing masks, the transmission drops tremendously by over 18%. Like it's down to single digits, low single digits, if both people are wearing masks correctly when they interact. But let's say for some reason you came across someone who wasn't wearing a mask and they were talking and blah, blah, blah. If they potentially were shedding viral particles, then those particles would be trapped on the outside of your mask.
Mm.
So when you take it off, you should be disposing of it. Now, masks aren't easy to come by. So what I do is I say, if you're going to take it off, put it into plastic and seal it, or maybe carry a sandwich bag with you or something, and then spray that bag on the outside with alcohol or whatever you have just to sanitize it. I go around with the N95s as well. If you have access to those, certainly if you're going somewhere that's considered high exposure, high risk, then definitely a surgical grade 3-ply mask like Omar was wearing, or your N95. And what you'll notice is a lot of the people showing up to do work in your house, they're wearing their N95 mask because historically they were already using N95 masks. So most plumbers, most construction workers, etc., that's historically the mask they use to keep
Mm.
out fine particles.
I see. I see. And you just mentioned the mask. You you anticipated the question I was going to ask you. Um, which mask is better? I mean, this is one. This is a bigger one. It's a different
Yeah,
one, and this is like the 3-ply. I think that you
yeah,
talked about that I just had on. Is there one that's better than the other? And I know you said N95s are probably the
yes.
best, I guess.
N95 is considered the best. Now, this is the N95 that's sort of available at your local Costco and Home Depot and so forth. There is a duck billed shape N95, which is the one that the hospitals actually give us, and they test us with a special sugar powder. Because if you can taste it, it means your mask isn't sealed. But this is the N95 that's commercially available for most people. So that's the best one, if one that has a perfect seal around your face. But the next best, and this has been studied extensively now, is the three ply. And that's because if you consider it, three ply means there are three layers in different angles that will block particles as they're coming in. So if the first layer didn't block, then the second layer would block, and then the third. And likewise, going out, the same thing. So we know three ply is best. If not, then the cloth ones that are stitched and sewed, it's recommended that they be two layers, and it looks like yours is double layered. And that's intentional. And that's because so that one would have its layer, and then inside there's like a mesh or a foam as well. And so all masks are better than no masks. So even though we're saying ideally N95 three ply, we know a cloth mask is still better than going out with no mask at all.
That's great. And for those who are listening and not watching, I held up what you would know as the generic three-ply mask, the one that's blue. You see people wearing them all the time. They have the ear loops on them. And the other mask that I was holding up was a thicker mask that had ear loops on it, different type of material as well. And Dr. Cindy held up an N95 mask. And many of you, I'm sure, who are listening have seen one of them or have one of them yourself.
Yes.
I just think that there was one other thing before I forget to ask you, because I was going to ask you this. Um, what do you think about these, what they call gaithers, or the thing? They're kind of like these scarves that people wear and then they hoist them up around their
So
noses. What do you think about that? Are those effective at all or not?
they're expensive. They're equivalent to your cloth masks. So yes. Have I worn one? No. Am I planning to wear one? No. And that's because it's ineffective in the sense that moving it up and down from your face to your neck, etc., it's just collecting fomites from around where you're moving around, etc., and then you're pulling it up all over your face. You're kind of undoing a lot of the goals that we just described for the masking, which is to prevent transmission, prevent your exposure as well. So you're not really preventing your own exposure per se. It's unfortunate. And so, no, I think it's valiant that people have preferred that. It's also interesting that people would prefer to wear that over a mask. Personally, I think you should wear a mask and invest in some eyewear, because we do know the virus can enter through your eyes. And there are some elegant studies that suggest certain people who were exposed, who never took their mask off, nobody else in the house was sick. It means that they likely contracted it through the eyes.
And face shields to that extent. How
Correct.
about those?
Yes. Well, face shields with a mask, absolutely. I know there are people out there who are wearing face shields without a mask, which is interesting because the face shields, air particles can still come in from the sides and underneath. So your face shield, sure, it's something, but by itself without a mask, I'll put it this way, you're not going to see a healthcare worker wearing only a face shield. They'll be wearing
Right.
their face shield and a mask.
And one other footnote, it's amazing, those gaithers or whatever they are that we just discussed, that you just talked about. It's amazing how many politicians I have seen wearing those. And
Yeah,
I have seen wearing them around their necks, very prominent politicians.
like a scarf.
I don't care to name them, although I've talked about them recently. So
Yes.
people who have listened to my podcast regularly know who I'm speaking of. But it's incredible. And they're wearing them around their necks.
I think it's part of the misinformation, and it's part of human beings, if we're being honest, we're very rebellious. And certain members of our community, no matter what's going on, they need to be on the other side of history, the other side of the status quo, etc. Especially if the other side is your historical what's the word, opponent, right? And so, it's been, mask wearing has been turned into a liberal versus conservative issue, which is so silly. And the wearing the gaiter is almost like this is how conservatives protect from COVID. That's how the whiny liberals, you know what I mean? It's turned into that, which is unfortunate because COVID is a national public health issue affecting everybody. COVID doesn't say, oh, is this a liberal? Is this a Democrat? Is this a moderate? COVID doesn't, there's no such thing for COVID to make such judgments with. Yet it turned into that, which I think would be one of the, when history looks back at this 15, 20, 30, 40 years from now, that's going to be one of the major summaries in all history textbooks is how politics turned a public health issue into a public health crisis and one of the greatest whittling of human numbers in recent times.
On that note, Dr. Cindy, I want to thank you so much for your time. Dr. Cindy Dugan, Medical and Laboratory Director of the Nevada Fertility Institute. She also is the host of a podcast entitled Girl Powered Success and Survival International Mission and Foundation. It's just an honor to have you on again. Thank you so much for coming back on and giving all this really important advice and edifying us with valuable information and educating us because that's what we must continue to have. Thank you again for your time, Dr. Cindy Duke.
Thank you for having me, Omar. And here's the big 2021 for all of us.
Oh, thank you. Absolutely likewise. So be well and Merry Christmas to you as well.
Merry Christmas.